Hi everyone, thanks for checking in. It's Adam Copen here at Low & Co, and today we're looking at the Wellington real estate market for the month of October 2025, comparing it to the last couple of years, seeing what trends are happening out there. So in summary folks, in October, unfortunately Wellington values hit a new low, a new post-peak low. Previous low point was, I think it was May 2023. We have bumped below that point in October, so a fresh low since late 2021. So message for sellers is, look, the market's still tough out there. You still can sell stuff. It just needs to be well presented and priced sensibly. Sales volumes have also stalled a bit in October, so that's a bit of a concern, but it's not a trend yet. And buyers, still plenty of choice out there, so get amongst it. So let's get into the detail. Median sale price, $767,500 in October versus $795 a year ago. That's down 3.5%. It has sort of come up a bit, then down a bit and so on, but over the last 18 months or so, if you look closely at that red line, on average, the trend has been slowly eroding away, broadly going sideways since the middle of 2022, but in the last 18 months, there has been a very gradual eroding of those median sale prices in Wellington. If you follow these videos, you know I don't pay too much attention to median sale price because it reflects not just the underlying values, but also the mix of properties sold in the month. Of course, what we're curious about or most interested in is underlying values, not the types of properties sold. So the best way to, the best guide to the underlying values is the Real Estate Institute House Price Index. So let's look at that. Start with what I call the league tables. This is showing the movements and values in the different regions of the country since the peak in late 2021. Wellington has, for most of the last 4 years or so, had the auspicious privilege of falling the furthest since those peaks in late 2021. So to October, down just over 26% since late 2021. Compare that to Auckland, a little less than 22% down. Compare that to New Zealand, just over 15% down. So Wellington City still leading that league table in the worst possible way. Over the last year, down 2.9%, obviously a much smaller number. We had the big drop in late 2021 through to the sort of mid to late-ish 2022. Since then, it's been much more broadly going sideways, but nonetheless, 2.9% is still a drop, and it is the biggest drop of all the regions in the country, so still the biggest loser in the last 12 months. Not quite the biggest loser in the last 3 months there, so down 0.5%, so obviously much smaller numbers, but most parts of the country are sort of in gradual positive territory, whereas in Wellington here, still down ever so slightly. I mean, let's call it flat, 0.5%. This is statistical rounding error, really. The only region that fell further in the last 3 months is Taranaki at 1.5%. So looking here at the table here, look, you can see there, Wellington, the house price index of 3193, that has dropped below for the last couple of months the previous low in May 2023, which was 3209. Of course, these numbers are just indices. They're not actually dollar figures or anything. They're just a guide as to if it's going up or down or what the trends are. Wellington City, 2731 versus 2756. So again, May 2023. So across the whole Wellington region, values are slightly lower than the previous low point we got to in May 2023. So you can see there, look, throughout Wellington over the last year, 3 months, 1 month, values definitely are still falling slowly across the region. Looking at the different territorial authorities, Porirua, Upper and Lower Hutt and Wellington City, you can see there, look, varying degrees of weakness generally over the last 12 months. Pretty weak in Lower Hutt and Wellington City, both with falls of over 4% over the last 12 months. Not quite the same weakness in Porirua and Upper Hutt. Over the last 3 months, still no sign really of any recovery happening there. Generally speaking, small negative numbers across the board. The exception being Lower Hutt City there at a very small positive at 0.3. Again, we could call that a rounding error. So no real sign of recovery in the Wellington regions over the last 3 months either. Wellington City there, you can see, look, quite weak, and it has been reasonably consistently weak in the city, and the same is true of Auckland City. Wellington City and Auckland City, by some measures, are relative to what's normal for those locations, among the cheapest markets in the country. But you can see there, look, over the last year, Wellington City's dropped over 4%, over 1% in the month, 1.5% in the last 3 months. And in fact, if you looked at those league tables for just Wellington City, the house price index is down 27.5% for Wellington City versus the peak in late 2021. So big drops in the Wellington City real estate market. So yeah, overall it's not pretty for us owners and sellers in Wellington City, unfortunately. Number of new listings now, 848 in October versus 783 a year ago, 634 2 years ago. 2 years ago was election month, and the number of new listings coming to the market at that time was very low. It absolutely skyrocketed after the election. But now that's why you're seeing such a big disparity between October 2 years ago and this October. So 8% up versus the same month a year ago. So obviously, as sellers, what we want to see is fewer new listings coming on. That is, fewer properties to compete with when we're trying to attract the attention of the buyers. So an increase versus a year ago is not going in the right direction from a seller's perspective. Overall, as you can see there in the 6-month average, we're down across the last 6 months on average by 7%. So that trend is the seller's friend, if you like, but in October we bucked that trend. So it'll be interesting to see, is this the start of a new trend, or is it just a bit of a data blip? Only time will tell, because you can see there, if you look at the red line, over the last 6 months or so, you've seen the number of new listings has definitely been coming down, but then a big spike in October. So let's hope that's not the start of a new trend. On average, October, 775 new listings, and so at 848, we brought considerably more new listings to the market in October than is typically the case for the month. So again, that's not good news for sellers. If you look at this, the number of new listings coming on in the month compared to the same month a year ago, you can see there that over the last 6 months or so, after having 12 or 15 months where we had way more listings than 12 months prior, over the last 6 months or so, generally we've seen fewer listings than 12 months prior. That, of course, is the vendor's friend. We want fewer new listings to compete with. And you can see that from where the red line goes below the x-axis there. But in the month of October, the blue bar chart shows it above the x-axis, so more listings coming on than the same time a year ago, and that has caused the red line to blip upwards. So let's hope that's not a continuing trend over the next few months, but time will tell. What about number of sales? 655 in October versus 676 a year ago and 493 2 years ago. Again, 2 years ago, market was very constrained by a lack of new supply coming on, so the number of sales that could take place is constrained. But 655 versus 676, so just 3% down compared to a year ago. If we again look at the 6-month average, we're 611, 3% higher than the average for 6 months to October 2024. So generally speaking, over the last 3 years or so, we've seen the number of sales increasing. So that would be, compared to a year ago, a positive trend. It's barely positive at 3%. So in the last 6 months or so, yes, it has been more. We have seen more sales taking place, but the degree to which we're seeing more is only just above zero, sort of thing. So it's really slowed down over the last 6 months ago. So, and again, you can see that trend. Look at the shape of that red line there. Overall, for the last 3.5 years, it's been increasing, not rapidly, but increasing reasonably consistently. But over the last 6 months, that has stalled, and the red line has broadly been going sideways. So again, overall, it's been a positive trend for sellers moving in the right direction. In the last 6 months, it's been really glacial, only the most minutest of increases. So again, if you compare it to number of sales, so number of sales there at 655, still well below what's normal for October at 705. Again, you see this comparing to 12 months prior. The red line has been above the x-axis there. That's the 6-month average since Late 2023, we've seen increasing sales compared to 12 months prior. Since late 2023, considerably more until about 6 months ago, like I said before. And over the last 6 months, the number of sales taking place has been barely beating the same month 12 months prior. Number of days to sell, 46 days versus 41 a year ago, 37 2 years ago. And the same is the case with the 6-month average, 51 days on average the last 6 months. 46 days, the same 6-month period in 2024, and 44 same period in 2023. So on all those metrics, it's taking longer to sell property in Wellington. Again, you can see that in that red line there. Over the last 2.5 years, it has been increasing reasonably consistently. The blue bar chart there, you can see though, over the last 5 months, it has been dropping away since June. That's quite typical as we come out of winter and into spring. Properties tend to sell a little bit faster. It's not all the time, but is often the case as we come out of winter. Properties tend to sell a little more faster. So I wouldn't conclude necessarily that this is an indication that the market is strengthening by that metric alone. Number of weeks worth of inventory, 16 weeks, same as last year, considerably more than October 2023 at 11 weeks. And at 16 weeks, we're barely just slightly longer than the long-term average. It feels, so on that basis, you would say we're broadly a balanced market. It sure doesn't feel like a balanced market though, and that is because we've typically seen just over 10 weeks worth of supply on the inventory in the last 10 years or so. Again, if you look at the shape of that red line, you can see that the inventory on the market has been consistently increasing. That increase has slowed right down over the last 10 months or so. So that's positive sign that things aren't getting any worse for us sellers. Number of trade new listings, 3109 as of a couple of days ago versus 2989, so a 4% increase versus a year ago, 39% increase over 2 years ago. Again, that's a reflection of how tight the market was as we were coming into the election. So look, a slight increase in terms of gross number of listings on the market than we saw a year ago. Whereas 12 months ago, we saw a big increase over what we'd seen 12 months prior. That was coming off a much lower base. And so we're still seeing increases, but only very small. So in summary, folks, values are slightly down in Wellington versus 12 months ago. New listings are up versus 12 months ago and above October norms. And this is bucking the trend that we've seen over the last 6 months or so, where we saw new listings fewer new listings than 12 months prior. So that new data point in October is not the vendor's friend. Perhaps it's a positive sign for sellers. For buyers. Sales volumes are just lower than 12 months ago and are still significantly below October norms. And again, sales volumes have generally been increasing, and in October that was not the case. Duration to sell is up versus 12 months ago and is generally long. On average, I think in October, 12 days longer than the average for October, but it has been falling away since June. Inventory levels are above normal, but only just. Trade new listings slightly up versus last November. So the message for sellers is, look, the fundamentals, as in how many new listings are coming onto the market versus how many sales are taking place. You're seeing over the last little while, you've seen new listings coming to the market slowing down and sales increasing. Overall, those fundamentals are going to act in the vendor's favour, but October was an exception to that rule. So for sellers out there, you'll be hoping that October is not the sign of a new trend. Buyers, there is still a ton of stock to choose from. Get in amongst it. And big thanks, as usual, to Real Estate Institute and to realestate.co.nz for all the data. If you want individualised advice, then of course reach out. It's Adam here at Low & Co. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.